So his current Chelsea deal, then, Liam, is that he still has 3 years to run on a 5-year, £340,000 a week contract. Is that correct?
Yes. Every time I write that, I have to take a step back and just look at the numbers again, because it really is staggering. The parting gift of the Abramovich regime to the new owners. This is one that you can't lay at the door of Bowley and Eghbali. And it's a massive, massive headache for Chelsea. I think their single biggest headache going into this transfer window, because, we spoke about book value with the other players. His remaining book value based on the transfer fee that they paid for him, I think £97.5 million in 2021, is around £60 million, which no sane football club in the world would pay for him at this point in time, based on everything that's happened in the last 2 years and the amount of injuries that he suffered at Inter. So Chelsea are in a position where the only two options really that make sense are to loan him again, to find a club somewhere, whether it's Inter or someone else who's willing to cover part of his salary, and maybe he can sacrifice some money to make that happen again, as he did last year. Or they bring him back into the fold and try to use him and rehabilitate his value at Stamford Bridge. I mean, they do need a goal-scoring number 9, and Lukaku, for all the other baggage that has emerged since he's returned to Chelsea, he has been one of the most reliable goal scorers in Europe over the past decade or more. So I think a lot depends on who is appointed Chelsea's new coach. We do know that the new owners had some regret about the speed at which they packed Lukaku off to Inter and the terms at which they agreed to. I think they saw that as a significant backing of Tuchel at the time, and then of course they ended up sacking Tuchel not long afterwards. So I don't think there would necessarily be a barrier to him coming back in that sense.
You look at this Chelsea side with all the different wingers, number 10s, everything else that they've got, and he would be an ideal focal point for them, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but I kind of thought that last season, was it last season that he was at Chelsea? It feels like a decade ago. And, you would have thought, you've got Reece James one side, Chilwell the other. You've got this kind of so many Ziyech's, Pulisic's, that kind of profile of player. That should be loads of service for him. It makes sense for a focal number 9, but it just didn't work. And I suppose the question around that is, did it not work because of purely the relationship between the coach and the coach and the player, with obviously a really poor relationship with Tuchel and Lukaku, or was there something, or was Lukaku just simply not good enough for that role, or actually is that real kind of more old-fashioned kind of profile of number 9, is that just a bit outdated for how many top managers now want to play? I mean, it's only really Harry Kane, Haaland, and Lukaku is not quite at that level. Certainly not anymore. Weghorst, Anthony Martial, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting one. I think into this season he's been a little bit unlucky with injuries. I think he came back from the World Cup a little bit quicker than maybe he would have done if it was kind of a normal season, in terms of because he was desperate to play at that tournament. And it's a weird one. They're still in the Champions League, but they've had quite a poor season. I'd be surprised if Inzaghi was to stay another year, which I think would help Lukaku as well. I mean, you've had other strikers. Lautaro Martinez has had a poor year there as well. But I mean, as far as I know, I mean, the way it was described to me when I had a conversation about it yesterday was everything is possible in relation to Lukaku's future. That the relationship with Chelsea's owners is quite good. So that possibility of returning is not closed. Equally, if they can find someone that's prepared to pay 40-50 million, I think they would cash in pretty quickly.
Could it work, Liam, and why didn't it work? Was it simply about the interview that he gave about missing Inter? I mean, did that then make it broken, or are there other things?
No, I think the interview crystallized the problems. It didn't create them. I think there was a failure of expectations on each side, where Lukaku expected to come into Chelsea, particularly given the price they'd paid for him, and for the team to be rejigged around him in an attacking sense to maximise what he does well. Whereas I think the Chelsea squad and Thomas Tuchel were thinking, we've just won the Champions League with a very defined identity. Any player who comes in, regardless of the price that's paid, has to fit into that. And that created a football fit that was very evident on the pitch, a football misfit, that was very evident on the pitch, and proved to be a pretty unbridgeable gap, where you had Lukaku used to getting the ball far more directly for him to run onto, in some cases to pick the ball up on the run. And you had a Chelsea midfield that was very focused on slow, patient possession, working the ball from side to side. And it just, it worked famously against Arsenal on Lukaku's debut, where he looked amazing. But then I think as soon as teams adjusted to the way Chelsea were using him, there weren't really any counters. And that's where I think the personal element of it came in as well, in that, Thomas Tuchel had a pretty bad record at Chelsea of dealing with number nines. He froze out Tammy Abraham almost immediately and ended up selling him, which I think is a decision a lot of Chelsea fans still can't understand. And then seemed to wash his hands of Lukaku very, very quickly, which I believe, there's no way of proving this, but I believe even if the club hadn't been taken over and Roman Abramovich was still in control, I think that would have led to problems between Tuchel and the hierarchy sooner rather than later, because you can't do that to the club record signing.
Do you think they are asking? Are they asking any managerial candidates? Would you use Romelu Lukaku? I mean, it would seem an obvious. I mean, it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? It's like, here we are. We spent nearly £100 million on the striker. He's out on loan. We might struggle to sell him. He's still got 3 years left. Could you use him? And are we going to bring in a manager who could? Or look, it'd be a bit daft to compromise on a manager based on someone that we're not sure we want to keep anyhow. I mean, which way do you go?
I think it's really.
Sorry,
go on, Liam.
No, I was just going to say, I think it'd be smart for them to be asking the question, but the problem is there's quite a few players to ask that kind of question about. Can you maximise Enzo? Can you maximise Mudryk? There are quite a few of these expensive guys that Chelsea are trying to fit in now.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting in, I suppose, the more high profile the manager, the more that conversation becomes the manager leading it, saying, what are you going to get for me? Whereas the owners are probably thinking, well, what are you going to do with the mess that we've currently inherited/created? I can't imagine someone's like, I don't know, say, not that Chelsea would be interviewing Antonio Conte, I wouldn't think, but let's rule nothing out. If they were, I can't imagine him walking into a room and saying, I'm going to come in and I'll clear up that mess, I'll clear up that mess, I'll clear up that mess. It'll be, I want him, and him, and you're going to get me that person. And I would imagine with the kind of the stature of some of the people that Chelsea will be talking to, that is the way that part of that conversation will go. And because those owners have kind of shown a willingness to just do that to a large extent, to keep spending, then maybe that's what they'll do again.
What do you think he wants to do? I mean, Adam, you mentioned that his relationship is, as we understand it, is okay with the owners, but he seems so happy at Inter Milan in his first spell. It's not been great this time. I think he's been on the receiving end of racist abuse as well. I think Juventus supporters last week. What do you think he wants to do?
I think it's always difficult to know with Lukaku, because he's a player that has moved so often in his career, and then you thought kind of Inter was finally that place that he'd found a real settled home, and then he kind of bolted out of Inter pretty quickly and suddenly to go to Chelsea again. And he, every time he comes back to England, he talks about unfinished business, and I'm never really sure whether he means it or whether it's a bit of like a a PR line to a certain extent. You know, I'm back and we're going to do it this time back at Chelsea. Like I said, I think it will help him if Inzaghi was to leave Inter. I think he would be open to staying there. I don't think he would go anywhere else in England apart from Chelsea. I don't think there is that sort of substantial interest at the moment for that to happen. In which case, I would think, you know, you start looking around Europe. Bayern Munich need a number 9. Might be a handy solution for kind of everyone in that. Manchester United need a number 9 if he's really committed to unfinished business.